Hi, my name's Catherine from Crime Psych. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the psychology of stalking. Before we begin, it would be helpful to define stalking. The definition given in the dictionary is to pursue or approach stealthily, but that is a very simplistic explanation of stalking. The Crown Prosecution Service defines stalking as repeated and unwanted attention, which is unwanted by the victim and causes alarm or distress. Stalking is legally defined as one offence type. However, it does incorporate a large number of possible behaviours that can develop over time. For example, stalking might be threatening phone calls or unwanted letters or text messages or emails. It might be unwanted gifts being sent or tracking your movements or stealing property. It could be threats of violence or intimidating behaviour. And this can be a person who is known to the victim or can be a complete stranger. It's more common for the perpetrator and victim to know each other in some way, usually in an intimate way. For example, the stalker could be an ex-partner and the emotional ties have been severed. This can happen particularly if it happens suddenly. The most common behaviours in stalking is letters, emails, text and gifts sent. The offender might camp outside the house or at the workplace of the victim. They might make announcements about them or spread rumours about the victim or maybe even destroy their property. In extreme cases of stalking, it can lead to threats of violence or even rape, assault or murder. The type of relationship can vary, and the relationships can be something from complete strangers to being well-known and possibly in intimate relationships in the past. Some researchers have focused on classifying these relationships when it comes to stalking. When the perpetrator is a stranger, there's usually some pseudo-intimate relationship between them. Even when they are strangers, there'll be some connection between them in the offender's mind. The offender might blame the victim for a loss or failure of some kind. The victim might be somebody who's in the public eye and the offender has developed an imagined relationship between them. Stalkers are mostly male, however, females can be stalkers as well. Because of the diverse nature of stalking, much of the research into this area has been directed towards classifying stalking behaviours and the different stalking scenarios. Once the various classifications exist, it may then be possible to design interventions and rehabilitation programmes for such stalkers. As I said, some researchers have focused on the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. And they've done this by looking at the level of and type of interpersonal relationship between them. A researcher named Ritchie proposed one such classification system in 1994. He suggested that the relationships between a stalker and a victim could be classified as celebrity stalking, acquaintance stalking, and ex-partner stalking. However, that's a fairly simplistic classification system that excludes some types of stalkers. For example, what if the stalker had mental health problems? What if the stalker was a stranger? And what if the victim wasn't a celebrity? And also, what if the stalker was a work colleague of the victim? Other classifications of stalkers also exist, and they can focus on various aspects of the stalking behaviour. For example, some focus on the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, and others focus on the psychiatric and mental state of the offender. Some researchers focus on the context of the stalking behaviours and maybe the rehabilitation of stalkers. All of this research can be neatly summarised into two classifications: the interpersonal relationship and the nature of the contact between the victim and the perpetrator. A classification of stalkers by Harmon and colleagues in 1995 suggested that the stalking behaviour will be either affectionate stroke amorous, type of interactions, or there'll be persecutory or angry type interactions. In 1992, a number of researchers defined stalking behaviour in terms of the level of intimacy, or at least the level of sought intimacy by the offender. Some stalkers are ultimately seeking sexual contact with their victim. Other stalkers might be looking for some type of revenge. Whilst all of the different research areas are important in their own field, it would be more helpful if a theory would focus on all aspects of the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator to form a more complete view of stalking. Cantor and Ioannou proposed a comprehensive model of stalkers in 2004, and they proposed that rather than being distinct categories, stalking interactions and types existed on a continuum. They suggested that a stalker would treat their victims as either an object, a person, or a vehicle. When the victim is seen as an object, the main objective of the behaviour is control. And this is possessive behaviours in which the offender assumes to have some sort of ownership of and is able to control their various behaviours and interactions with their victim. This would include behaviours such as repeatedly driving past the victim's workplace, the offender contacting the victim after a restraining order has been put into place, contact with the victim's family, which can also become aggressive. And this also includes threats and confrontations, or maybe even physical attacks on the victim. The offender would have a complete lack of empathy for the victim. The main characteristic of this style of stalking would be aggression. When the victim is seen as a vehicle, though, the main characteristic would be contact, which is normally of a sexual nature. This would be evident in behaviours such as asking to meet, entering the victim's home, stealing or destroying personal property. The offender is simply using the victim to express his or her own desires or anger. The final category is when the victim is treated as a person. As the label indicates, the offender takes an interest in the overall life of the victim. The offender would conduct research about the victim and various aspects of their life. They might even follow the victim or plant some sort of surveillance devices to track their movements. All of these behaviours are an attempt to reduce the level of distance between them both and create a higher level of intimacy between them. And this can be seen as an attempt to form a somewhat normal relationship between the victim and the offender by stealing the information and by forcing the relationship in these ways. All three of these categories can range from a little to a lot, or from minor behaviours to quite extreme behaviours. The level of stalking behaviour depends on the offender. The next stage to this research would be to determine the likely characteristics and relationships between the victim and the offender. And this framework could also form the basis of a rehabilitation programme which focuses on building appropriate interpersonal relationships. However, on saying that, if I was being stalked, I would not be interested in knowing whether the offender saw me as an object, a vehicle, or a person. I would be more interested in knowing what I could do to stop it. The first and most important piece of advice I can give you is don't engage in contact with the offender in any form. Even if you were to react in a violent or an emotional way, that is what the offender wants. They want to engage with you and have your attention. Every time you shout, "Leave me alone," down the phone or change your habits, this is what the offender is looking for. Let's say somebody has sent you 2 letters and 2 texts and left a present at your door and you didn't want it. That in itself might not be enough for the police to arrest or prosecute them. The main criteria for the police to act is by somebody being in fear of their or someone else's life. At the beginning, you might think that this unwanted contact is a one-off and it'll stop once they get bored and fed up and you don't respond. But they might not get bored. So document everything in as much detail as you can. Keep as much evidence as you can, including keeping all of the texts, emails, photographs, friends' accounts as corroboration. And all of this evidence will be valuable should it ever be taken to court. Never put yourself in danger when gathering this information and evidence, though. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you march outside and take a photo from close up out of the driver's window. If you're worried that somebody might be stalking you, keep your phone on at all times. Let people know where you'll be and when you'll be there, and also discuss with them what they should do if you don't turn up. Report each and every incident to the police and keep a journal of these activities. Never engage with a stalker, even if it is in a negative way. Any contact will be seen as positive by them. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I do hope that you've learned a little bit something about the psychology of stalking. Look after each other. Bye for now.